when I met you for the first time in Idaho, you were in a dress at the time.
Yeah. My brother wears a dress. Goodness gracious, that's why I'm a mess.
Now, I didn't know if you were trans or I assumed you were non-binary. Are you non-binary now?
Yeah. No. Well, it depends. In the way that I used to mean the word, I could still arguably say I am, but I have all the problems that are unique to people with penises. I have unique problems because of my having been born with a dick, and those unique problems are problems that I have to deal with, that you have to deal with, that anybody who is born with a dick has to deal with.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. David McKerracher is the founder of a theory, lecture, and education platform called TheoryUnderground. He is the author of 2 books, Waypoint, Time Energy, Critical Media Theory, and Culture War and Time Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy. And let me try to read that again. He's the author of 2 books, Waypoint, Time Energy, Critical Media Theory, and Culture War, and Time Energy. You have no time or energy. One more time. God. He is the author of 2 books, Waypoint, Time Energy, Critical Media Theory, and Culture War, and this book here, Time Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy, which he wrote while working at Amazon. When not teaching or organizing for Theory Underground, McKerracher is listening to audiobooks or writing books in the bathrooms at Amazon. He has a wife and cat and a son. Oh, wait, no, he's got a wife and a cat son. Is that right? You don't really have.
Yeah. Our first child is a furry one, but we do plan to be parents of real humans eventually.
Well, good. You gotta keep the labor force, well populated. So I just want to start. We're going to talk about this book today, Time Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy, and I want to start by asking you, what is time energy?
So time energy is a concept that comes out of, I like to say it's between and beyond Marx and Heidegger. And when, of course, I say beyond, I mean that in terms of Aufhebung, this is sublation. Mm-hmm. But I've always been really taken by the existential standpoint, right? And Marx takes on the critical political economy standpoint most of the time, unless he's writing expressly political pieces. The existential structural tension is one that I'm still working through methodologically. It's a complicated issue, but basically what I like about Heidegger is the way that he takes from Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and tries to found an existentialism based on first what's given to us phenomenologically, right? Staying within Kant's phenomenal reduction. And and so the job of my thesis for my master's thesis was to do an existential phenomenological analysis of labor power. That was a slip. Labor power specifically. And the reason that I did that is because I think that's the most important concept in my life, right? My whole life has been as a worker. My parents have always been workers. Everyone I've ever known has been workers. I was the first person in my life that went to college, or in my neighborhood or in my family that went to college. And so thinking about labor power is something that I started doing when I was in a political philosophy class that introduced Marx, but didn't really give him his due. We spent weeks and weeks reading Hobbes and Plato, but we glossed over Marx really quickly. And I remember being like, what's with that? Why did we skip over this guy? And I didn't really know anything about Marx at the time. And so I started doing some research on my own, started talking to professors at the campus who I could track down, who knew something about Marx, and got one of those professors to give some talks to the philosophy club I was a part of at the time. And that's where I got introduced to, wage, labor, and capital, as well as estranged labor. And so that was my real point of entry beyond the manifesto, was thinking in terms of how there's a structural system that is, at the time, I would have just said alienating us. I think it's more complicated nowadays because, after Althusser, there's this big debate about whether Marx is always thinking in terms of alienation or if that's his Feuerbachian stage. But it doesn't matter. What mattered at the time was that was the first time in my entire life that I began to think about the fact that it's not just me or other actual people who are to blame for all of the problems in our lives. Like, I still have responsibility. Other people still have responsibility. In some sense, we still have choices in matters. But what sets the horizon of our possibilities, so to speak, or the actual environment that we live in, that's structural. And, it was a tremendous relief to realize it's, people in my life who let's just say didn't do a really good job showing up in relationships, for instance. Well, yeah, there's part of, they have their part to play in that. I have my part to play in that. But at the end of the day, there's only so much that we can do when we don't have any time or energy to really do those things that matter the most to us, because we're always working, right? And so that was kind of the point of entry, was always thinking about time and energy. And then through my work on my thesis, eventually I came to time energy. And what came out of that was that this is, using Heidegger's terminology, an existential, which is to say like an existential structure of our existence. It is the thing that is necessary so that we can do labor power in the first place, or so that we can be seen as or show up as labor power in the first place.
Okay. So let's talk about the word existential or existentialism. I'm not sure. When I think of existentialism, I think of Sartre, maybe Kierkegaard as a proto existentialist. I'm not a scholar on Kierkegaard or Sartre, but I've dabbled. When I was in my 20s, I read about existentialism, got a big anthology of essays, read some Sartre. And my understanding of existentialism is the claim, it's an anti-essentialist doctrine of philosophy, which claims that existence precedes essence. That is, that we are self-creating, that we aren't born into the world with our personalities fully intact or with our moral values already given by some Platonic realm, say, but rather we determine our morality and our personality through our actions in life, and that we are therefore existentially free. We're not bounded by some structure that exists outside of our own choices and actions. Is that a good definition? Is that the kind of existentialism or the existential fact of time energy that you're pointing to?
That's a really good question and summary of basically what is meant by existentialism, especially the kind of existentialism you get into when you first start studying it. Like when I first started, I started with Sartre and Camus. Mm-hmm. And, it's like the two of them are kind of the go-to. And of course, with Camus, it's the myth of Sisyphus. And with the Sartre, it's existentialism is a humanism, which Heidegger then, argues against. And I guess that was a real a bummer for Sartre. He wasn't too happy about it. Heidegger was kind of an asshole. We all know this. But for Heidegger, the issue, I think, is deeper than just the fact that he was kind of post-humanist at this point, which is something I already take issue with in Heidegger, that I don't like that. But, I think we need to think about this question of what the human is, especially today. But the issue, I think the deepest issue between, say, Being in Time and existentialism as a humanism is that for Sartre, existence precedes essence, whereas for Heidegger, existence is essence when we're talking about the human being. And so it's not that it precedes it. Like Sartre was mostly interested in the fact that we can make ourselves, and that we're kind of cursed to be free in that sense. We're constantly faced by non-optimal, catch-22 kind of situations, and that's what he's focused on. But for Heidegger, he's focused on thinking about existence as a fundamentally different mode of being than the kinds of being that, say, a tool, like my water bottle or a pen might have. Like that's a tool being, as opposed to something that you're just analyzing, an object of an analysis, right? So, he would call those ready to hand and present at hand. But those two modes of being are conditioned by the fact that there's a kind of human in the process that is existing. But what he means by existing is not like this sort of like Buddhist Zen kind of just being in the present, which is kind of how people like Byung-Chul Han will talk about Heidegger. No, existence for him is always projection on a horizon of possibilities, which is to say, like, we're always projecting forward. Even if you're saying, well, I'm just going to sit here on the couch for the next 3 hours and do nothing. Well, you're projecting doing nothing into the horizon of possibilities, which is to say the future. You're collapsing a bunch of different possibilities into, well, no, I'm going to sit on the couch, right? And that's a decision. And so the choice and decision thing that Sartre really takes up is there in Heidegger, and it is important in Heidegger. But Heidegger, and this would get us too much into the weeds, but Heidegger, I would argue, is not a individualist existentialist. He definitely has this sort of totalitarian conservative streak, even in Being in Time. And so,
okay, so
yeah.
let me just ask. Okay, so I'm really not a Heideggerian scholar, but I have, again, like, for beginners comic book version of Heidegger in my head, and only a sketchy version of that. But tell me if this is right. That Heidegger believes that we are thrown into a world.
Yes.
That when we arrive, due to our heritage, we are already defined as a being, a way that we inherit ways of being in the world. So that then we are kind of charged with being disciplined by and loyal to Dasein, to a way of being in the world. And that in a way, this is a return of the essence, but the essence isn't in some Platonic realm, but is historically developed, and it's a matter of a tradition or a way of life that you're already thrown into. Is that right?
You're actually circling in on the thing that everybody likes to skip over, I think, and it's very important, because the standard American Heideggerian response would be just to say that, well, you don't have to take on that heritage. Your historical standpoint is what you're thrown into. You didn't get to be born in ancient Greece. You didn't get to be born in the future. You got to be born right now, whenever that is, right? And you find yourself here. You find yourself here, having never really made any real choices in the matter. You've been living other people's choices because your parents, your school, et cetera. So you're correct on all of that. But of course, the standard comic book version, which I think you just went beyond, would be to say, oh, it's falling, you're falling into theyness, which is just a way of saying everyone's got like their normal way of going about the world, and that's what you've internalized, and now you do that. But the way to get beyond that is to have being towards death, and by anticipatory resoluteness towards death, you'll be able to kind of weed out the inessential things about your life and then realize what your true possibilities are. And that's where people read him as an individualist existentialist, so almost compatible with like liberalism. Which if you stop on chapters 1 through 3 of Division 2, absolutely. Everything up through chapter 3 of Division 2, all of that fits that comic book approach. But what you're talking about is where we get, I think the rubber really hits the pavement, is chapter 5 of Division 2. And that's where he brings in heritage and historicality, the fact that in theyness, in falling, in average everydayness, like whatever, the sort of norms that we pick up, it's just kind of like this ambiguous possibilities that we project. And we, for the most part, project them in a sort of passive way. Even if you say, well, with New Year's, I'm going to run every week. And you're saying, no, I'm choosing this. It's like, yeah, but are you really choosing your health? Like, are you going to, like as he would say, commit to health and like really research and develop an understanding in health as a possibility itself? Or are you kind of just copycatting what you see other people doing, and even when you're actively choosing, you're still kind of passively choosing because you're not trying to get to the root of this activity, which is, your life process, it's health. And so for him, it's like we're kind of swimming in a pool of average, vague possibilities, and we kind of flitter from one thing to another in a sort of restless, distracted, tranquilizing way. And then, this sort of thinking about how this is all finite, and then running forward into danger is supposed to strip down out of all of those possibilities. It's supposed to help you find the real important ones. And then in chapter 5, that's where you find out the real important ones for him. That's going to be, for him, it's the Volksgemeinschaft, right? It's the people, the culture, but this is where we can also say that race back then was almost inseparable from the word people, right? And so Volk is the actual word there. And that's obviously where it gets, that's where the whole book is kind of getting quilted by this moment where he's a complete, not even conservative, because he wants to, he's more reactionary than a conservative, because he wants to tear down the traditions and the establishment as it's been given to him, because he thinks we're so far gone from our real possibilities. We have to kind of start over again. We need to burn this thing down. Let me ask.
Okay, so you said something interesting. You said that when you were first thrown into the world, and kind of, and I don't know if this is Althusserian or Heideggerian, but and called into being by the world around you, hailed as a subject in this world, interpolated, yeah. This is all Althusserian, I suppose, but nonetheless, however you want to think of it, you're thrown into a world that you didn't choose, that you didn't have a part in making. It's already there before you. It already positions you in a place in that world. But you said something interesting, was that in that place, in this world, you have no responsibility or you're not given a direction right away. There are a lot of things you might have internalized, but it's also vague or open still, right? So my question is, what kind of world is Heidegger talking about being thrown into? I think, if you were thrown into the world of feudal relations, you wouldn't feel as though you had decisions to make necessarily, but only duties or responsibilities to uphold, maybe, given your station that you would be born into. So does Heidegger want to claim this is the human condition for all time, that you're thrown into a world and then need to pursue the truth by clearing away the distractions and finding the traditions of your people? or is this something that he's arriving at as a critique of, say, liberal modernity?
Well, it's definitely something that he comes to as a critique of liberal modernity, but I'm not sure if he's going to trans-historicize it to say, oh, it counts for all time. That's a really good question. Now, I think the important part of the question, if I'm not, am I getting this right, is the question of like what thrownness is and what the world really is, right? So world is not like the planet with the rocks and the trees and the
Right.
deep time, right? This is an existential world, and what Hubert Dreyfus teaches.
Well,
let's
not call it an existential world. Let's just call it a historical world, because the existential world,
thank you, yeah,
says you are existentially free, you are an individual, you determine your own morality, and all of that. That's from our conversation so far. That's where we've put existentialism. So this is just a human world.
Well, except that I'm using.
Go ahead.
He does use the word existential throughout the book, but I did say that the way that he's using the word, as opposed to being this radical freedom thing, the way he's using the word is to say there's no getting out of the fact that we're always projecting ourselves forward, and that's what he means by existential. And so you could say that and when we say projection, we're not talking psychological, we're talking temporal, modal. So it's like it has to do with time, and it has to do with modal possibilities, right? What's necessary, what's not necessary, what's contingent, what's possible, what's impossible.
Right, and so here we have something that's kind of interesting just about existentialism, the term, which is that existentialism is thought to mean that there are no essences, right? But ontology, or the study of being, is a study of what it is to be, which is precisely, I think, a metaphysical study of essences. Right. So, and if we think being and existence are the same, what it is to exist is to be, then to start with existence is just to start with the most abstract version of an essence as you can. I'm reading The Science of Logic these days, by the way. So that's
of course. Okay.
But yeah, so existence as a complete abstraction of just pure being, say, is, I think, also where Sartre wants to begin, right? But he wants to, and this is where I'm not enough of a Sartre scholar to know how he derives this sort of freedom from his study of being, and being in nothingness, which rings of Hegel to me, being in nothingness. But nonetheless, yeah, so I just say that what we're talking about with this existence is an existence which, for Heidegger, is historically determined.
So I think the most important piece here is there's a big argument in the field over whether he's actually the philosopher of being, or if he's a philosopher who only cares about the question of what makes being intelligible in the first place, which is almost, if we go with that interpretation, which is the Thomas Sheehan paradigm, then he's not doing a metaphysics. He's doing a sort of, he's saying, okay, without getting into speculative metaphysics, with just staying within what's phenomenologically given, are we able to deduce and infer the grounds of what makes being intelligible to us? And that's that he wants to, it's without doubt that that's his main chore with his magnum opus, Being in Time. With the rest of his life, there's more arguments over the different directions he goes with that. But I do think that this is beyond dispute, that in Being in Time, being for him is not, it might be the most abstract, it might be the most concrete, but he's kind of bracketing out that we can even know or ask the question of what it really is until we've spent the time like setting ourselves up to even ask the question. And he says to even set ourselves up to ask the question, we have to ask who's asking the question. And is the kind of asker who asks that question going to have the same kind of being as a tree or as a hammer? Well, no, and so then what would its mode of existence be separate from the tree or the hammer? Well, it's projecting itself onto a horizon of possibilities, right? And so it is abstract, but it's also staying pretty strictly within the confines of what's given, and then deducing and inferring on the basis of what's given. And then I would just say, the caveat there is that's what Heidegger thinks he's doing. I think that he stops doing that. He has lapses, and he definitely stops doing it in Division 2, because I think that his life was in transition from being a critical philosopher into being an ideologue. And that transition is working itself out in the writing of this book. Mm-hmm. And so I have my criticisms of everything he does and blah, blah, blah. That's kind of neither here nor there. I am teaching a course on it, and I just got finished with the lecture on chapter 5 a couple of days ago from Division 2, which is why I'm all primed and I could just talk about Heidegger this whole time. But
I'm enjoying the Heidegger talk. But let's return to time energy. But I want to have one last kind of not go around on Heidegger per se, but to come back to time energy. When you are throwing forward this term time energy, is it competing with or vying to replace something like Dasein from Heidegger?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is the answer to your other question that kind of got us going down Heidegger in the first place, which was, what's an existential, right? And so existentials are the structures of Dasein and of being in the world. And there's no separating Dasein from being in the world. They implicate one another and they determine one another. And that Dasein without a world is what he would call just a subject, right? So the liberal subject is a de-worlded Dasein. And of course, there's Dasein in its inauthentic sort of average everyday sort of way of being. And then there's resolute anticipatory Dasein that's kind of choosing its life. But his basic point is that you're always choosing or losing. And that's why he says throne. The connotation of throne is like, you didn't choose to be here. And that's obviously something Sartre runs with. But, just working within the bracketed domain of this is our starting point is the being that asks the question. And then what can we kind of deduce about its kind of worldhood? He comes up with all of these different existentialia, would be the plural of these existential structures. And those include things like understanding, state of mind, discourse, care, anxiety, significance. It goes on, being towards death. There's these different existentialia. And then they all kind of fit together in the way that all these German thinkers who were, influenced by Hegel will do. Is you can't understand one of these terms without these other terms. But one of the biggest moves Heidegger's making to go beyond phenomenology, to go beyond his predecessors, especially Husserl, is bringing in hermeneutics through Schleiermacher and Dilthey, which is to say, he takes the equiprimordiality, I hate that word, of understanding, state of mind, and discourse to be his main operating assumption throughout the book. And so what that means is just that understanding, and then the fact that you have a state of mind, that you always have a state of mind, that you're attuned to the world through moods, and that you are always in discourse, right? We can't think of ourselves before discourse, right? We're language beings. We're in how Lacan would talk about it, right? Well, to say that these are equiprimordial, though, is to say understanding doesn't precede our moods, and it doesn't precede language. And in fact, it's the same way, no matter how you arrange it. All three of them require one another. But when he says understanding, he's not talking about this as a strictly intellectual kind of understanding. He's talking about a gut sense that we have for the possibilities of a thing. So for instance, like before you even learned how to use a phone, you had some kind of a sense for its possibilities. When I'm working at Amazon, I don't understand how most of the equipment in there works, but I have a gut sense for the possibilities of different things. Like a mechanical thing has certain kinds of possibilities that an animal does not have, and vice versa. And so we have a sort of gut sense, but it's not a sense for its essence as a substance. It's a sense for its being in time on a horizon of possibilities. So the kind of the, what can I do with this? What does this mean to me, and what can I do with it? It's always kind of future pointing, right?
Mhm.
Well, okay, I think it's fascinating, and we could talk about the existentialia the whole time, but time isn't existential for him. It's a structure of our being in the world. My move is to say time energy is the existential, and that he never thought about energy because he always took it for granted, because he was always the kind of professor who didn't have to do anything except for exactly what he wanted to do, right? Like Adorno in his little essay on free time, says that, whether it's philosophy or the way he listens to or plays music, all of these things are not hobbies for him. They're passions. And he admits, he says, I have some privilege, the fact that I get to do this, but because everyone else has to work, everyone else, when they're not working, their free time is recreational time. And then he emphasizes the fact that that's recreating labor power, right? So Adorno is very keen on this. Well, Adorno is keen on that because he takes Marx seriously. Heidegger's not keen on that because he takes his energy for granted, and he doesn't try to think about what it is to be a human under the normal conditions of capitalism, where you're selling, I would say, your time energy as labor power. And it's not just that you sell it as labor power, because you could be retired early, you could be unemployed, you could be supported by other people. Whatever your situation is, the schooling system itself, as well as all of our social, symbolic, cultural reference points and role models, presuppose that the only kind of value that we can make in the world is one that's based in our turning ourselves into labor power, right? The schooling system presupposes that, of course. And so even if you become unemployed or are independently wealthy and you just don't have to work, you're not going to have like this kind of leisure time that Adorno's talking about and that Heidegger presupposes, because you've not been cultivated that way. It actually takes training, it takes community, it takes a variety of things, including different role models who have their own kind of passion projects that are not profit directed, in order to discover, not just talent, but like the aspiration to be more than a producer consumer. And so,
Okay, so energy. Let's talk about energy as the part of the time energy equation here. It sounds to me like one of your complaints about Heidegger would be that he doesn't recognize something that someone like Marx recognized, which was before you can have culture or discourse of any kind, or religion or traditions, you have to have in your way of life a way of producing the shelter, food, clothing, maybe roads, the material basis for your existence.
yeah,
And that is a matter of energy, because if you don't eat, you won't have enough biological
absolutely.
energy to keep going. It's also another way people talk about it is a matter of reproduction, and you mentioned recreation, including the term or idea of reproduction. So time energy would be a way of being in the world that takes into account the need to reproduce yourself and for society to reproduce itself. Is that right?
Time energy would be the precondition for you being able to reproduce yourself and for society being able to reproduce itself.
Well, to say it's a precondition is true, because and when you get thrown into the world, you have to be thrown into a world that's able to reproduce itself, right?
Right.
But as a way of life, as a Dasein, it would be your way of participating in the reproduction of the society that you were thrown into.
Yeah.
On a material basis, not just on the basis of leisure, which you were talking about, which would be for an individual outside of the process of reproducing society, but for yourself and society both.
Right. And so obviously for us, that's the commodification of labor power. In previous societies, it was just the outright exploitation of labor through slavery. There's different ways of talking about it, but I would say in all of these, any social system is going to have some kind of an idea of how to work with time energy, because but it's like it's water to fish, right? Like you just have it, and then of course, because you have it, you don't have to think about it, and then you use it, right? We have to think about it because we don't have it. And that this is where I have to actually define it, because when you asked me originally about it, I didn't actually ever define my term. And so at this point, it probably just sounds like I'm mashing time and energy together, and that just means time and energy. But the technical definition that I've been working out over the last couple of books here is it is large energy infused repeatable blocks of time that are reliably spread, not just throughout your year, but like probably week to week, right? And I say large energy infused blocks of time because a person could get all, granular and say, well, what about the time energy, of a minute or of 5 minutes or of 10 minutes? And the reason this is kind of like the classic philosophical, dilemma. At what point, how many grains of sand do you have to add before it's a heap? Well, I'm going to go ahead and bracket out the when and how question and just say, I know as a worker, I do not have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time throughout my week. I know that I might have little tiny moments that might seem repeatable and energy infused, but as soon as we start saying large energy infused, repeatable, reliable blocks of time throughout the week, it makes really clear what's been stolen from us. And that is
you do have those blocks of time, but you have chosen to sell your labor power to Amazon for a wage so you can reproduce yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
you've chosen. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing about wage labor is that unlike slave labor or serfdom, you are able or allowed anyway to go and work for anybody who will hire you. You don't have to choose a particular job based on how you were thrown into the world.
Right.
You can, I just saw a YouTube video yesterday that said you should seek out rejection as a pathway to success, because if you apply yourself to as many different things as possible, trying to get jobs that you're not qualified for, trying to get into schools you don't think you have the grades to get into, asking people out who you think are above you, in terms of beauty standards or sex appeal or whatever. The only thing that can happen is you'll get rejected, and you will be surprised how often you're not. So that's the position of the worker. They're not constricted to where they try to sell their labor power. And they can go apply for anything they want. And, the only thing that they can be told no, they cannot get a contract, but they can't be thrown in jail or thrown off their land.
Right. In a sort of sense, we even have the freedom of homelessness. I think this is actually a controversial thing, maybe, but I've said that before because it's like, especially with a certain kind of tanky, I just like to really emphasize, the liberal freedoms have some more than merely formal substance to them. And of course, we are coerced to work because we'll be homeless if we don't. But at least you can choose homelessness. Now, of course, in some cases, that's not possible. They're actually going to chase you out of the city or whatever. And the conditions of homelessness don't really allow for a flourishing life. So what, is that a real choice? Whatever. But the point is, if I quit my job, they're not going to say, you're a traitor, comrade. Now, 2 to the gulag with you or whatever. So
Mhm.
yeah, the freedom to quit a job is a substantial freedom.
When I was
Absolutely.
reading your book, one of the things I wondered, and I wrote this down and sent it to you, so I'm going to skip to it if I can find it, was at some point you say that all previous philosophies have ignored time energy. But I thought, reading about it, that Henry Ford didn't ignore time energy. He devised an assembly line to minimize time and thereby expend less energy in the production of cars, allowing for more cars to be produced and making cars cheaper, which allowed for more energy to be spent on the production of cars. The division and time, both. The division of labor and centralization of production created more useful things and made the reproduction of labor cheaper as well. So why would you say that Henry Ford didn't understand the significance of time energy?
If I wanted to just be pedantic and not actually get to the heart of the matter, I'd be like, well, he's just not a philosopher. But here's the thing. Henry Ford was a genius, and he did think about time and energy in a way that was more sophisticated than most people. And of course, there's been tremendous gains made through that kind of systematization. Did you read the quote in there? I think I quote Foucault talking from the section on the
I did read that. That was
bells.
Yeah.
Why
did you summarize that and tell me why you're bringing it up now?
Yeah, and so basically Foucault is, he's talking about the disciplining of labor power in that section. It's in Discipline and Punish. It's in section 3, I think. It's a famous part about the bells and whistles. Like, it basically, there was a time when work was a lot more lackadaisical, but maybe even if you didn't get to choose your own breaks, there was a little bit of flexibility in the day and around certain kinds of tasks and stuff. But as capital valorization is becoming increasingly not just intense but also refined, the discipline apparatuses become so as well, and that's where we start getting the need for a clock that is able to count down to the second, right? That's where we start. Everyone starts working off of calendars. It's no longer just priestcraft, right? There was a time when that was just priestcraft. And then the church bells would set the important times of the day. But all of a sudden, instead of church bells marking the important times of the day, and then people, let's go in for lunch. It's like every task you're doing is being counted down to the second. And this is where Foucault starts talking about what ultimately Ford develops, which is to bring it back to what you're talking about, which is the taking every task, breaking it down into its moments, and then figuring out ways of streamlining each of the processes in those moments in a way that will maximize time freed up and less energy expended. Absolutely. And then, of course, the tendency, though, and this gets to why automation hasn't exactly liberated us or anything yet, right? Is just to say question. That, right. Well, and that it's just that all of those gains in time and energy reduction are made so that one person can do the job of 10 other people, 50 other people, 100 other people, right? So you have one cashier doing the work of 10 cashiers because they're running around helping people at the self-checkout. Or there's me, scanning products and taking them off of the conveyor belt and putting them on the pallet and doing all of this stuff. But because there's so many robots in the process and because so many of the tasks have been streamlined in a way that helps get rid of, now no longer needed workers, I'm doing the work of a whole bunch more people in that process, right? So that's
but it may not be very grueling work if depending on how automated it is. So the problem is, it creates unemployment. But let me put forward this solution for you. And now we're entering into very practical day-to-day policy kind of politics. But Andrew Yang, universal basic income. Why not make a set a standard for universal wealth which, by the way, Elon Musk talks about in the After the Singularity,
right.
Post-Singularity, where the time energy will be so thoroughly rationalized and automated that the amount of time a human being actually has to spend interacting with the reproduction, the mechanism for reproduction of our material needs will be so small that we will thereby be freed up from recreation and because we and from time energy as being the defining thing in our lives. We'll have fully automated luxury wealth, luxury capitalism, I think would be how Elon Musk would think of it. But the question for us would be, what is the difference between the vision of Elon Musk, where post-singularity, and the vision of a communist who wants fully automated luxury communism? And what is holding us back from realizing that potential that seems to be developed through like Fordism and the capitalist division of labor.
Right. Well, and so I spent basically the year after writing this thinking about that question, because I felt like the most important piece of the book that I hadn't written. I basically wrote this in one sitting that started at like 6 a.m. and went until about midnight. Right. So it was a full day.
Like Kerouac style. One big long piece of paper. You just keep writing. Only your paper is your computer. Yeah.
And I did a lot of it on the smartphone at Amazon, because that day I woke up and I was like, I think I'm ready to write it. And I had already had a few chapters of it written, but I decided to start all over again. And I just started writing. And then when I had to go to work that day.
Did you write this with your thumbs? Really?
The first half of it.
Now I resent you. Okay, now. Fucking are you a millennial or a zoomer?
I'm a millennial, but
fucking millennials with your thumb skills. I have to type, I can barely text. Anyway, go on.
I nowadays I always say there's only two generations, and they are these bimodal states of mind there, and that is boomer and zoomer. That's all there is. Everything else has been washed away. And then the only question is in what respects are you a zoomer? In what respects are you a boomer? Because you're the one who was helping me with my audio before we started recording today. So in right. in that respect, you're the zoomer here. But anyway, no, I wrote the first half of it at a coffee shop, and then I went to work, and I was writing it outside of work, and I was like, I'll just be an hour late. And I kept writing. And then I was like, I'll be another hour late. And I kept writing. And then I was like, I'll at least go inside. And so I went inside, and then I was like, I'll just go to the break room. And I would just start writing it on my phone in there.
Did they get on you? Did you?
So I'm writing a book about work at Amazon. And in it, I talk about kind of like what I'm interested in is the future of work, and the fact that they have turned extremely difficult tasks into basically idiot proof. Very accessible, like anybody can be trained into it, and you can do it mindlessly kinds of tasks. And I think that's fascinating, because that's the direction automation takes us. And it's great as long as you don't have to do it too much, which hurts you. I hurt my elbow at the previous warehouse because you're just doing the same mechanical tasks all day. It's great if you don't have to do it too much. And it's great if you can listen to music, podcasts, and audiobooks, as well as YouTube channels.
Do they allow that?
No, you're not allowed to. But I'm one of the I belong to that proud group of Amazonians that are 1/3 of Amazonians. I think, just going off of my own sort of experience in 2 warehouses, I would say 1/3 of us have the rebel earbud, the secret earbud, and some people wear it out openly. Other people hide it. I keep it underneath my beanie or headband, but if you wear it out openly, you might get talked to. I did get written up wearing it out openly one time. And so then, and I was like, everyone else just wears it out. What the heck? And so then I just started hiding it. But my book about the future of work is for people like us who are interested in that question. but it's also for anybody who works at Amazon who might tune in and actually read it. I want to convince the management, even Bezos himself. I want to convince them at a moral level that it matters that people are allowed to listen to things, because otherwise you just have the same thoughts on repeat all day. You're not adding anything new. And that's where it's truly soul sucking. But you can get a lot of inspiration and mental cultivation being able to tune into things. So I take
Why
it
do
as
you
like
think they don't allow you to listen to things?
The simple answer that they give me, because I've talked to a few managers so far about this, because I advocate for it all the time, is they say, oh, well, you know, a while ago somebody had both earbuds in and they weren't supposed to, and we were an accident almost happened, and that's why we have to enforce this. And I'm like, yeah, but if you just had one earbud in and a one earbud policy, arguably that person wouldn't have had two earbuds in the first place, because they would have been trained to know that you only have one in. And then they go, well, there's just other safety concerns. And I go, well, that's where I go, okay, well, my brother works at a lumber mill with ropes and saws and chains, and he runs a forklift, and it's one of those giant forklifts. Like, it required a lot of training for him to be able to do that. This is a much more dangerous kind of work environment than an Amazon ergonomic 21st century kind of warehouse, right? And my brother is able to wear OSHA approved headphones. If my brother can wear OSHA approved headphones in a lumber mill, then I don't see how they get off saying it's dangerous
Those
at a
are not
place
just
where,
to quiet the sound, but to give him something to listen to as well, if he wants to.
oh yeah, no, he OSHA approved electronic noise canceling, but Bluetooth enabled headphones. Yeah, so OSHA has these approved.
Mhm.
So I think that it's a merely it's a sort of, they don't want to put the extra thought into it. It's very easy for them to say don't do it, and then if you're caught, well, if you're hurt and you happen to have an earbud in, they won't get sued. So for them, it's just them covering their asses. But I
Also,
think that
how much churn is there at Amazon?
Oh, incredible! Yeah, it's just bleeding all day, every day. Yeah, people constantly leave. Yeah,
Right. And are they get
But-
fired, or do they leave on their own accord? Both, maybe.
I don't think people get fired very often.
Okay.
Yeah, you would have to do something really crazy to get fired. Like they're very liberal, and not just like, oh, we have the rainbow and the pronouns and that's sure, but no, they're pretty forgiving. Like I take anywhere between 2 and 5 bathroom breaks per hour, and I often will spend at least 5 minutes in there. And sometimes
I'm cutting this because I don't want you getting fired. And also, I would advise you, if you want to keep the job, don't talk about that in public. All right. So,
No, don't cut it. Don't cut it. It's okay. I talk about it on my podcast that is called Workers of Amazon. And I'm out here daring them to fire me. I'm waiting for it, because then I'll just write it in my book. It's okay. But anyway,
that was
let's
my
get back
boomer
to
moment. That was my boomer moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Young man.
No, it's okay.
All right. So, well, listen. So there are a lot of things we haven't talked about with time energy, but it sounds like what you're really getting at here in your book is the fact that you're selling your time energy to someone else all the time, so you don't have the time energy you need to develop your own independent life.
Right.
And that includes on the level of having good relationships or having a family, or it can include that anyway on certain levels.
One, that's what I put up at the very front is, I kind of start with this sort of self-help level, because ultimately just, between Henry Ford, business success books and self-help books, like that's where you find people who think about time and energy. It's people who are thinking about success under capitalism, and they talk about time energy as time and energy constantly. And for me, as someone who had never really read any serious nonfiction before the age of 22, let's say, I started listening to audiobooks that got into self-help and business success stuff at the age of like 21, 22, because I was trying to think, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? And because my entry
How
level
old are you
jobs
now,
were
Dave?
I'm 36.
Oh, really? Okay. You look younger than
Yeah.
that. But then again,
I
you
look
know,
like a baby.
I'm 53, so for me, anyone under 45 looks really young. Anyway, but
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
go
but
on.
I do have a baby face. But no, it was what I'm saying is that I started really thinking in terms of time and energy during that phase of my life when I was trying to figure out how am I going to, not be constantly broke, not be constantly just scraping by, and how am I going to get beyond the entry level into something higher up in the chain or start my own business. And so that's when I started listening to audiobooks, really. And the thing is that all of that stuff breaks down. All of the self-help and business success stuff breaks down because ultimately we just have to work. And we just have to discipline ourselves to be able to show up and work. And there might be something, you might be able to save a little bit outside of work. You might be able to, do rich dad, poor dad and spend all your money on assets instead of liabilities. You might be able to do Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People and start to prioritize your time in one of those grids with the different quadrants where you've got your urgent and important kinds of activities versus your not important but still urgent kinds of activities. Break it all down, and then he says center the ones that are important but not urgent, because otherwise we'll forget that, and that's where you lose your family, and that's where you are, fail yourself, and you end up estranged to your kids. And he's talking to the business class, and so of course he's talking to executives who've lost their families. And I think we all kind of get that. Yeah, that's where you succeed, you win the world, but you lose your soul. In the sense of having lost relationships, now you have no respect from your own children because you weren't there through formative stages of their life. Because money can buy you a lot of things, but it can't buy you that sort of we would say quality time with your kids, right? And taking them fishing once in 5 years isn't going to cut it. In fact, they'll resent you for all the other times you didn't do it at that point, right? And so I'm centering. I start from that individual standpoint of you have goals, you want to self-actualize, you have projects, you have latent talents that you haven't discovered, and if you have discovered them, or if you have a calling, then you're going to feel the frustration of those aspirations, right? That frustration of those aspirations, because instead of being able to learn the violin and become the virtuoso that you need to be, or whatever, or speak multiple languages, or whatever it is that you want to be able to do, you can't because you're exhausted. And so I do start from that individual level, but then I always take it into family, community, culture. And I think that's the most important level, because the individual, before it even realizes it's an individual, was a child, and that child had to develop, and that child's not going to develop very well if their parents didn't have time energy.
Okay,
right? And so,
that's great. Yeah, listen, we've been talking for about an hour. What I want to do is keep you around. I want to send you another link in a minute, and I want to talk to you about something that happened a while back, where you were given sublation a little trouble just because we said we liked Freud and not Lacan or something like that. I want to go back over that and see. I know it wasn't a very serious disagreement, but I do want to know, like what is it? What does Zizek and Lacan mean for you? Why is the difference between Freud and Lacan important to you and your politics? And whether or not I have wandered away from the reservation by being interested in people like Adorno and Jacobi, rather than Zizek. So let's talk about that in the Parrot Room. Wait, go ahead, say something before
we cut this one. Yeah, thank you. Right before we close this one out, I guess as some closing thoughts, there's a couple of loose ends that I just want to tie up. And the one was when I was talking about writing this at Amazon and all of that, where I was going with that was to say, after writing it, I spent a whole year thinking, how do I talk about this thing where the more time and the more energy we save, the less of it we have? And there's like a sort of very abstract, very technical way of talking about it that Moishe Pistone calls the treadmill in Time, Labor, and Social Domination. But the thing is I was trying to write this book for people who aren't necessarily reading super technical stuff like that. And And then thinking about it, I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I spent a year constantly just facing writer's block, and I would try to read different things that might help me on it. Well, what I came to is the afterword that I wrote like just a couple days before this was published. I sat down and I wrote this in like 6 hours. It's called Labor Saving Devices from Descartes to Keynes and Gores. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm the first person to point it out, but I had never seen anyone else talk about this. In the Discourse on Method, Descartes talks about how if we unlock science, if the church gets out of the way of science, we're going to be able to have an infinity of devices that will be able to satisfy all of our desires. And he says that these will be labor-saving devices. He explicitly says that they're going to be labor-saving devices, but in the same breath, he also says something about our workers, right? I don't know if you remember that quote, but so he's talking about our workers, but he's also talking about labor-saving devices. And so everything is in its sort of seed form in Descartes' Discourse on Method. He even, at the end of that, this is a side note, but he talks about the problem of artificial intelligence and whether we'll be able to tell the difference between the machines that look like people and actual people. So he starts talking about that in the 1600s. It's kind of crazy. But mm-hmm. But the reason I bring in Keynes and Gores is because Keynes said that, by 2000 or, the first decade of the 2000s, that we would be working 14 or 15-hour work weeks, right? Because of the time saving that we were seeing from these labor saving devices. And so, of course, my question is, well, then why is Keynes wrong? What is it that Keynes is not seeing? And of course, Gores, as someone who was heavily influenced by Marx and, played a really big role for the New Left, he's also thinking about things like automation and UBI. And he's all very critical of Keynes. And so, I think that he's way ahead of Keynes and he's thinking in the right direction, but his estimations as far as like how much time would be saved by automation were still way off. And so really, like, what is it? And so ultimately that's what I try to do in the afterword, is answer that question. And so I'll just kind of leave that as a hook for everybody. Yeah.
People should go and pick up Time Energy, which is available on Amazon, I'm sure, and also off your own website, right?
That's
I'll
right.
put a link to both places in the description for this video and podcast.
It has a new preface, by the way. In like 3 days, the new edition will be available. The new preface is written by Slavoj Zizek himself.
Oh my God. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.